This is exhilarating. Get excited.
You know, last words, you know, there's some funny final words that have been muttered before. Rosebud, that one's very familiar for a lot of like movie goers and movie fans out there. Citizen Kane, which, you know, the movie is basically undone within like the first 5 minutes of it, because when Orson Welles' character, when he mutters the word Rosebud, he says it on his deathbed. Here's the problem. There's no one in the room to hear him say it. So the crux of the entire film, them finding out, what is Rosebud? What were his final words? Was it a lover? Was it a secret account? Was it a secret love child that and no one was in the room to hear him say it. So how the hell would anyone know, like, to look for Rosebud? So one of the greatest films of all time, undone by like one of the tiniest oversights. I love Orson Welles to death, but in terms of his filmmaking, but good God, that's such a glaring oversight. But another one of my favorite final words. It was an American president. I forget which one it was, but he was sitting there in his hospital bed, and the nurse came in and said, "Hey, you're looking much better today." He looked over at her and said, "On the contrary," and then he died.
Yeah.
And then there was another one.
He told a funny joke as he died.
Exactly. He went out. That was actually really, really funny. Then there was another one. It was a famous author. I can't remember his name, but his famous last words were, "I would give anything for one more day with you, my love, Josephine."
And then his wife at the time was probably like, "Who the hell is Josephine?"
Exactly. His wife and children were like, "Who the hell's Josephine?" Turns out Josephine was his lover that he'd been hiding for like the last 10 years. Yeah.
What an ass.
I know. It's kind of messed up. And then, it was, then there was another one that's kind of hilarious. Kind of hilarious and also kind of sad. John Adams, the second president of the United States, his final words were, "Jefferson still lives." Turns out, no. Thomas Jefferson actually died earlier that day, and he didn't know about it. So, yeah. So that's kind of a crazy historical thing there. Like, but last words, like, if my dad on his deathbed muttered some final words to me that were vague, you know, just be like, he'd say, "First bank, lockbox 741. Ugh." I would just be like, "What? What?"
It's like, which first bank?
Exactly.
Where's the key?
Yeah, exactly. Oh man.
You're not gonna let me in there. What the fuck?
Exactly. And if like in the will, like there's like, "Oh yes, your father left you this old jewelry box that your grandmother gave to him," and I open it up and then there's the safety deposit box key inside them, and be like, I need to go to the different first banks in the area and figure out which one Dad went into. And I'll just be like, "Hey, is box 741 occupied?" No. Okay, moving on. And then if I say yes, I'll be like, "Okay, is it Brian Hamilton that?" And they'll be like, "Yes." Oh, yeah, okay. Let me. Well, we'll see. But I don't know. Last words. Yeah. But according to Mr. Ballin here, his final words made them billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Yeah. So
there's only so many billionaires in the world, and we know about all of them. So I wonder who he's talking about.
There's quite a few. I mean, I'm wondering which one. Yeah, I'm wondering which ones indeed. I mean, if we're talking about someone on their deathbed told Elon Musk something, and then all of a sudden from that idea... Wait, was it? There's a lot of billionaires. There's more than you think. Hold on. How many billionaires are there? How many billionaires are there in the world?
It's only over 3,000.
Over 3,000, yeah. So
it's not very many when
yeah,
you put it next to the human population.
Yes. And of the richest of them, there's Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison, the Bernard Arnault family, Warren Buffett, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Aminako Ortega, and Steve Ballmer. But yeah. And you notice who's not on here anymore, who was on here for a very long time? Bill Gates. Yeah, he's not on here anymore. And he just disappeared off of it. He was here in 2024, and now he's gone.
Weird.
I know. And of course, the Arnault family was on top in 2024. Now Elon Musk is. They're saying Elon Musk is on track to actually be the first trillionaire in the history of the world, which
is absurd.
It is. In which it's not like he has he'll have like a $1 trillion of liquid assets, of money at his disposal. No, it's all like going to be $1 trillion worth of assets that he has invested. So it's not like he can just go to the bank and just withdraw $1 trillion and then buy a country. No, if he takes all of his money out of the company that he's in, the stocks are going to drop and he'll actually make less money from that than the inflated wealth of it being in stocks. So again, my whole deal with billionaires and trillionaires and everything, some of them are earned, some of them are not. And of people who hold the opinion there should not be billionaires, like Bernie Sanders at one point said, billionaires and millionaires should not exist. And then Bernie Sanders became a millionaire and he said, billionaires should not exist. Okay, Bernie. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sure thing. All right. Anyway, Mr. Ballin, we got his video queued up.
I kind of think the fact that there's only 3,000 billionaires, though, it is pretty safe to say, to be honest, billionaires should not exist.
Yeah, I agree.
There should be a point where you have so much freaking wealth that, it's just kind of disgusting that you're just sitting on parts of it, not just distributing it around to people.
I think liquid wealth, yeah, if you have $300 billion of liquid wealth in your bank account that you're literally doing nothing with, yeah, there's a problem. But if it's $300 billion of investments that's out there and is going into companies and building up companies and giving people jobs, okay. But yeah, I don't know. There's a fine line, and in truth, given how everything's digital nowadays and we're basically out of the industrial era of the United States. I mean, the industrial era of the United States ended in the 90s. And there are still manufacturing jobs here and there, but it's mostly tech, in tech and software and all that. We don't because of the infrastructure we built in the throughout after the Great Depression and World War II and all the way up into the 70s and the 80s, we basically don't have the infrastructure to support another industrial age here in the United States. We'd have to train up an entire generation to do that. It's crazy stuff, dude. Talking about macroeconomics and microeconomics and all that, and just understanding where we are in terms of the structure of our country and capitalism, it's baffling. But I know one thing we're going to experience: some final words that made people billions. Who's ready to see what, in fact, these final words were? Let's go.
Today, we're going to look at 3 stories about real people who at some point in their lives made choices. Now, at the time, these choices were fairly innocuous, but eventually those choices would completely change not only their lives, but millions of other people's lives as well. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, Please steal the Like Button's phone and change the names of all their contacts to just say spam, so that every call they get, they think it's spam and they don't answer. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On January 17, 1977, a 36-year-old man named Gary Gilmore walked towards an abandoned canned food factory in Draper, Utah. Gary was surrounded on all sides by guards because they were afraid that Gary might try to run and not go inside of this factory. But Gary was not about to run. He'd been waiting for months for this, and he was ready. So Gary, along with the guards at his sides, made their way towards the factory, and then without any hesitation, Gary stepped inside. And what he saw was this big, cavernous, open space with no equipment in it, nothing. It was just basically this massive empty space and one chair pushed up against the far back wall. Gary knew he was supposed to sit in that chair. So without even being told, he just began walking across the floor towards it. And then when he reached the chair, he sat down. And once Gary was sitting, the guards that had walked him in began strapping his wrists and his ankles to this chair so he couldn't move. And as they did this, Gary didn't put up a fight. He just sat there staring straight across to the other side of this factory. And on the far side of this factory was one other thing inside of this space. It was like this big curtain, like somebody had wheeled out like this massive curtain that was protecting something on the other side. And as he was staring at this curtain that was sort of perpendicular to him, he saw there were 5 evenly spaced cutouts across the curtain. And even though Gary couldn't actually see anything in any of these cutouts, he knew what was behind them. He knew that at each station, there was a police officer armed with a rifle. They were the firing squad that Gary himself had requested. So Gary was a convicted murderer, and he had been sentenced to death just a few months earlier. His death sentence had gotten a lot of media coverage, and immediately after the sentencing, his mother, along with the American Civil Liberties Union, had lobbied to try to change the sentence and make it a life sentence instead. But while Gary appreciated their efforts, he actually did not want that. He did not want, to spend the rest of his life in prison. That was the only alternative to the death sentence, is life without parole. And that sounded horrible. And so instead, he had basically pushed to go forward with his execution, and he was very specific about how he wanted to die. He wanted to die by firing squad, and that had been granted to him. And so after the guards had finished strapping Gary into the chair, they backed off, and then the chaplain came over and read Gary his last rites. And then after that, he asked Gary if he had anything else he wanted to say. And Gary looked up at the chaplain and just said, "Let's do it." And so the chaplain backed off, signaled to the firing squad that Gary was ready. And then once everything was in place, rifles poked through the 5 holes in the curtain and they fired. Shortly after, Gary was dead. 10 years after Gary's execution in 1987, a young marketing executive named Dan Wyden was having a meeting with his colleagues at
Oh no. Nike. Just do it.
at his company's headquarters in Portland, Oregon. So Dan actually owned this marketing agency, and his company had recently signed this new client. It was a small business with a lot of promise who was hopefully looking to expand, and they were leaning on Dan and his team to help them do that. And while Dan certainly believed that this company had the chance to be huge, he just felt like they lacked something. They needed a strong marketing campaign to really get them off the ground and sort of begin to make them a household name. And so this meeting that Dan was having right now with his colleagues was their attempts at coming up with, what can we do? What kind of campaign can we run for this company? And so for hours they sat there pitching different ideas, different concepts of how we can elevate this brand. But it was like, even though a lot of ideas seemed promising, nothing really felt right. Everything just sort of felt like, maybe that would help. There was no slam dunk idea, at least not yet. And so as Dan is beginning to get frustrated, realizing he really doesn't have any great ideas yet, he suddenly has this epiphany. Now, Dan does not understand why he had this epiphany. He had not been thinking about this information until it just popped into his head. Instead, this idea really just kind of suddenly came to him. As he's sitting there with his colleagues, feeling frustrated, not knowing what to do, he just randomly found himself thinking about the execution of Gary Gilmore 10 years earlier, death by firing squad. It was all over the news. And Dan, like his colleagues, had certainly kept up with that story. It was a big deal at the time. And as Dan is sitting there just thinking about that execution, he remembered a very particular detail about the execution that for whatever reason just felt like, oh my goodness, we can use that to market this.
Literally. Literally.
Why?
Just do it.
That's so dark.
I know it is. But hey, Nike made billions of dollars off that. Well, they made that off, plus also the fact that they signed Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan became a literal low-tier god of pop culture and athletics, and was impossible to like not see. Also, them launching the Air Jordan line and enticing Michael Jordan with that is what got. That's the reason why Michael Jordan's a billionaire. It's not the money he got paid playing basketball. It's the amount of investment that he earned by literally being the flagship that made Nike the biggest shoe brand in the freaking world.
Brand. Dan would take a well-known detail from the execution of Gary Gilmore, he would tweak it slightly, and he would use it to fuel this advertising campaign for the small business. And it would work amazingly. In fact, this campaign was so successful, it literally doubled this company's business practically overnight. And this campaign, it featured a slogan that has since become arguably one of, if not the most famous slogans for any business in the entire world. The slogan that Dan created as part of this very famous campaign was based directly on Gary Gilmore's final words. Just do it. Dan's client, that small business, was Nike.
Bet you if you had his face up there was just doing it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't work quite as well.
No. It looks different with...
Everybody would have been like, what the...
Okay, compare this to Michael Jordan having that under. It's just like, it's a world of difference. It's just like Crazy Psycho. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, we're talking about Gary Gilmore, not Michael Jordan. Sorry. There are people out there who think Michael Jordan is a sociopath because of just how ridiculously competitive he was. Well, his dad basically bred it into him that it's just like the only way you're ever going to be something, Michael, is if you beat everybody else. And that's literally how Michael Jordan became Michael Jordan.
Last year, we launched a brand new podcast here at Ballin Studios called Redacted, Declassified Mysteries with Luke LaManna. And so far, you guys have loved it. And in case you haven't heard, we also launched a YouTube channel for Redacted, where you can not only listen to these episodes, but also watch the beautiful animations we've done for each of these episodes. That channel already has 150,000 subscribers, and it's growing really quickly, and there are hours of content available right now for you to binge. New uploads to this YouTube channel will be every single Tuesday. All you have to do is look up @Redacted Mysteries on YouTube, and I'll also be putting a link in the description below. Wondery Plus subscribers can also watch Redacted on the Wondery app. Okay, back to the stories.
Just use that shin of yours there, sonny.
One night in 2009, a 23-year-old man named Chris, along with his date, walked into a McDonald's in London, England. The following day, Chris had a very important job interview in the morning, and so this dinner in McDonald's was going to be the last part of the date. There were no plans beyond this. This McDonald's was dirty, it was loud, it was packed with people, so not exactly a romantic location for a date, but this was all Chris could afford. In fact, he really needed that job the next day because he just didn't have much money. But for now, this was the best he could do, and so he put on, his best smile and looked at his date like, is this okay? And she kind of looked back and smiled like, I get it, it's fine, we can eat here. So they hopped in line and they waited, finally got to the counter, they ordered their food and their drinks, and then after receiving them, they turned around and looked for a place to sit down. But as they looked around, they saw every table was taken, literally every one. And so Chris and his date began looking for tables where, there were at least a couple of empty seats. Maybe somebody was sitting there, but they might allow Chris and his date to sit with them. And so they began walking around, and eventually they would find a table where there was just this one guy sitting there. He was sort of minding his own business, just eating his meal. He was not taking up the whole table. And critically, there were 2 seats at this table that were unused. And so Chris kind of tapped his date and pointed to the table, And then the two of them walked over, and Chris very politely asked this guy, you know, hey, would you mind if we sat here too? You know, we won't bother you. We're just gonna eat and we're gonna get out of here. And the guy just kind of looked at him and he was like, sure, go ahead. And so Chris and his date, they sat down and they began eating and chatting, and it was all fine. But as they were eating and chatting, Chris, his mind kept going to the next day. You know, he had that big job interview the next morning, and it was just really the only thing he could think about. In fact, he tried hard to focus on his date, but he was just so anxious about this interview that he just couldn't, and so he found himself not really eating and just kind of waiting for the date to be over so he could just go home, go to bed, and, you know, focus on tomorrow. But as he's sort of distracted and his date's chatting about whatever she's chatting about, he realizes the guy they're sitting with is no longer just looking at his food. He stopped looking at his food and he's just staring across the table at Chris's date. And like the way he's looking at the date does not seem friendly. And so Chris realizes, okay, what's going on here? Did she say something? Did he say something? And so Chris kind of snaps out of his anxiety about the interview, and he looks at this guy and he's like, what's going on? Because again, this guy's just staring at his date. And this guy, sort of unprompted, without even looking at Chris, just begins insulting Chris's date, insulting the way she looked, insulting the way she talked. And Chris is like, what's going on here? He's looking at his date like, did I miss something? You know, remember, he was sort of distracted a minute ago, but then eventually this guy, he says to Chris's date, you're an ugly pig.
Rude.
And at this, Chris is like, I can't just sit here. And so Chris, who had actually never been in a fight in his whole life, just sort of reflexively stood up and he was like, hey man, get up. Like he's gonna fight him here. But as soon as he did that, Chris realized he had made a horrible mistake, because Chris, he was only about 5'8" tall. And this guy, just the way he'd been sitting at the table, Chris hadn't really seen his full stature. And this guy, when he stood up, towered over Chris. But Chris, you know, he was not a scared guy. You know, he hadn't fought before, but he was defending his date's honor here. And he kind of looks up at this guy and he just kind of winds up and hits him once. But then this huge guy just proceeds to beat the living crap out of Chris right there in the McDonald's. The next morning, Chris walked up to this big fancy building in London for his job interview. And Chris was doing his best to be confident, but it was really hard given the circumstances. So the previous night, after Chris had been battered by this total jerk, you know, eventually the guy had stopped and stepped off of Chris, and Chris had gotten back up again, and the guy kind of wandered off and was not held to account in any way. He just kind of left the restaurant and vanished. But Chris, you know, he got to his feet and he looked at his date, and she was totally rattled by it. And Chris was super embarrassed at this point, and he kept apologizing to his date, and she's like, no, it's fine. And they just wanted to get out of there, and so they left the McDonald's, and they both, you know, went to their respective homes. And Chris just went to bed. And then the next morning, when Chris got up early, because he has this big job interview, he went into the bathroom and he looked in the mirror and he saw he had this enormous black eye. But even though Chris understood that this very well could affect his chances of getting this job, I mean, they're gonna ask about his black eye, and what's he gonna say? Oh yeah, I got in a big fight at the McDonald's last night. You know, there wasn't really a good excuse for it, and he wondered what they would think of him if he showed up looking like this ruffian, you know? But he was like, you know what? This is the biggest opportunity I've ever.
Just tell him you got sucker punched. Like, that's it. Like, it's London, dude. I mean, that happens all the time. At least you didn't get stabbed. And dude, just say me and my girl, me and my girl were walking back to a flat, and then someone ran it behind me and just whack right me fucking eye. I went a little Australian there at the end. Sorry.
Ever had. I just gotta go in there, try to be confident, and don't let the black eye define the outcome. And so fast forward to later that morning, Chris goes into the building, he arrives for the interview, and before long he's having his interview, and he can tell they're all staring at his black eye, but nobody brought it up, which was sort of like worse in some ways. He almost wanted to be able to describe what happened, even though it didn't make him look good, but it was like the fact that they're staring at it and not acknowledging it, it really made him feel awkward. But, you know, Chris did his best. He got through the interview, and by the end of it, he had no idea what the interviewers thought of him or what they thought of his ridiculous black eye, but he thanked them for the opportunity, and he left thinking, I'm not gonna get the job. However, not long after this interview, Chris got some shocking news. He had gotten the job, and it actually might have been because of his black eye. Because this job interview was actually an audition for a starring role in an upcoming TV show. And the character that Chris was auditioning for was this guy who sort of got into fights. And so Chris rolls in here.
Wait a minute.
Chris, who was the actor that played Damn it. I don't know.
Looking like a guy who gets into fights, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, he can hit his lines, he's got the charisma, and look at him. He's even a ruffian himself. He fits the character perfectly. He's our guy. So Chris got cast.
Knew it. My God, are you serious?
And this TV show that he starred in became one of the most popular TV shows in the entire world. And so Chris went from being this guy who could barely afford a dinner at McDonald's to being this amazing actor who was getting nominated for Golden Globe Awards and Emmy Awards. I mean, he truly was an A-list star. Today, Chris is better known by his stage name, Kit Harrington.
Ah, okay. That's why I didn't put two and two together.
Yeah, because that's his actual like first name, Chris. Yeah, and honestly, as soon as I saw like the back, I was just like, oh come on, and then of course, I wonder. Okay, here's the during the first season, he actually dated Emilia Clarke. You know, he dated Daenerys, which is funny because they actually wound up together at the end of the series. But he actually is married to what's her name, who played the wildling girl that he hooked up with. They're actually married now, and yeah.
I wonder if Emilia Clarke was who he was on the date with.
I don't think so. But yeah, they dated for like the first like during like the progress of the first season, even though their characters didn't interact at all.
And the starring role that he landed that changed his life was the role of Jon Snow in Game of Thrones.
The Scrapper. You know, it's a very similar story to Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson was in Australia doing acting roles and stuff like that because he was down there staying with his grandparents. And when he was staying down there, he had an audition the next morning, and he went out and decided to have a drink with his mates. Well, he went out, and they picked on him because of his accent, and because he was an American, and he spoke with an American accent. They made fun of him, and he got in a bar fight. And according to what they said, he did good in the bar fight, but he still got beat up pretty bad. He went into the interview the next day, and George Miller, the director, looked at him and said, "Max," and thus he got the role of Mad Max. And the rest is history. That was the role that blew him up. One drink, two drink, three drink, hit the floor.
One night in 1925, a 21-year-old college student named Ted was inside of his dorm room at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, surrounded by his friends. Ted and his friends had gotten their hands on a bottle of gin. And so tonight, they were just sitting around, drinking this gin, and having a great time. Now, Ted and his friends knew this was not allowed. I mean, literally, they knew this was illegal. It didn't matter that they were 21 years old. At the time, in the United States, in 1925, the country was in the middle of prohibition, which meant no one was allowed to possess or consume alcohol. It was actually illegal. But
Volstead Act, yeah.
Ted specifically was willing to take that risk, because tonight he wanted to celebrate. Ted was a senior in college and was getting ready to graduate with honors. And also, he had recently been named the editor-in-chief of Dartmouth's humor magazine called Jack-O-Lantern. This was a big deal for Ted. I mean, he had aspirations of graduating and becoming a professional writer and publisher, and it just felt like everything was falling into place, you know, getting this job as editor-in-chief. It was a huge accomplishment. So Ted took a swig from the bottle and passed it around the circle, and before long, he and his friends were all pretty drunk and having a great time, laughing and joking and telling stories. It was a lot of fun. But at some point, they heard a knock on their door. And right away, Ted and his friends went silent, you know, remembering that, oh my God, are we in trouble now? You know, Ted said, no, it's fine. I'm sure it's just, you know, more friends coming to stop by and hang out with us. And so Ted, he gets up, he goes to the door, and, you know, his heart's racing a little bit because he doesn't know who's there. He opens the door, and it's not friends. It's two police officers. And so Ted and his friends all got busted for drinking alcohol. However, fortunately for them, the police did not press charges, and so nobody went to jail.
You see, that's the thing about the Volstead Act during Prohibition. They made all alcohol illegal, and there were politicians who literally were out in the street saying, "Let me show you how big of a joke the Volstead Act is. It's illegal to consume alcohol, right? Okay, watch this. "Hey, officer." And the cop literally was just like, and just walked off. Because that's the thing. The court system got so bogged down from petty drinking that it literally clogged up the justice system, and people were literally set free for nothing. They were just like, it's just like, how much alcohol did you consume? It's like, sir, it was one glass of wine. Go free. You're done. Get out of here. And yeah, Volstead Act was a joke.
And also the school, Dartmouth, decided not to expel Ted or any of his friends. However, they were dealt some pretty severe punishments. Specifically, Dartmouth stripped Ted of all of his academic honors and extracurriculars, which meant he was no longer the editor-in-chief of the Jack-o'-lantern magazine. In fact, he was told by the school that not only was he no longer the editor-in-chief, but he couldn't even submit to put anything in writing into that magazine. He was totally banned. Ted was heartbroken. Less so about the academic honors and much more so about being, cut off from the Jack-o'-lantern magazine. He really had attached a lot of value to being the editor-in-chief. He felt like things were going in the direction of him graduating and becoming this professional writer.
So maybe he went
so
on
this was sort of a
write something else that blew up way more than that probably would have.
We'll see. If this is who I think it is, then yeah.
devastating blow. Ted considered fighting with Dartmouth to try to reinstate himself with the magazine. But the more he thought about it, the more he knew that was going nowhere. They were not going to change their mind. However, Ted was not quite ready to just totally give up on this magazine. He knew this magazine did accept submissions from the public, and so he thought, okay, well, I'm not allowed to submit anything to this magazine, but maybe if I come up with a different name, a pen name, then I can submit my work, they won't know it's me, and maybe I can get something published. And so that's exactly what Ted began doing, and the new editor-in-chief of this magazine had no idea this pen name was actually Ted. And so when they received the work from the pseudonym, they thought it was some new person they had never heard of. And they were so wowed by the work, they're like, this is great! And they began publishing all of Ted's work, not realizing it was his. And for Ted, oddly enough, this became in some ways more satisfying than when he was writing under his own name. He kind of liked this pen name. It kind of, fit the vibe of his writing. And so he just continued up with this ruse for the rest of the time he was at Dartmouth, and then after he graduated, he just continued to write under this pen name. Throughout the rest of his life, Ted would write and illustrate over 60 books, all under this pen name, a name he came up with basically just because he got caught drinking in the dorm in college. These books would entertain and inspire generations of people, and in fact, he would even win a Pulitzer Prize for his contribution to American literature and education. Ted's full name was Theodore Geisel, but I'm sure you know him much better by his pen name, which is Dr. Seuss.
Hell yeah.
Knew it. As soon as they said Ted, I was like,
I don't think I ever knew his real name for sure, so.
Dr. Suez of the Suez Canal.
In case you haven't heard yet, our newest graphic novel, Mr. Ballin Presents Where Nightmares Live, is available for pre-order right now. It contains another 9 heart-stopping, strange, dark, and mysterious stories, all based on real events. This was a passion project. It took a lot of time, a lot of people involved, from the artwork to the storytelling. I mean, this is a beautiful piece to add to your collection, so you gotta check it out. The book comes out on September 30th, but again, you can pre-order your copy at book.ballinstudios.com, or you can click the link in the description below. There are a limited number of hand-signed copies available, but those are gonna sell out very quickly. So please pre-order today, because remember, your nightmares are waiting. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya.
Thanks, John. Well, damn. That was good.
Those are not quite as dark as usual, but that's fine.
No, but that still very entertaining. Well, the first one was dark.
A little, yeah.
First one was
had some
pretty
dark
damn
connotations,
dark.
yeah.
Yeah, but then Shiner This one wasn't dark as much as it was, you know, like kind of inspirational.
The beginning of it was a little dark because that dude that just hit him.
You're
for
a
no
fat
reason.
pig.
Yeah, what the fuck was wrong with that guy?
I don't know. Probably just intimidated. And then, of course, here at the, you know, here with this one with Dr. Seuss, you know, that wasn't dark at all. I mean, it was a dark time in America because of the Volstead Act, you know, literally making drinking illegal. You know, very, very dark time. But yeah, this was great. This was really, really good, and I'm gonna leave a like on this. So, Mr. Ballin, aka John Ballin or John B. Allen, I'm glad that we were able to watch this. I'm glad that, you know, the stories that were shared with us were a lot of fun. And yeah, if y'all liked what you saw here and you want to see more from the one and only John B. Allen, Mr. Ballin, feel free to click on any of these links that pop up on screen. Probably take you to his channel, probably a playlist that we have reacted to a bunch of his stuff. And if you want to see more from us, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. And also don't forget to leave a like because it really helps the channel out a lot. So, till next time, everybody, signing off, I'm Nate.
I am Nick.
Be good people, take care of yourselves. Peace.